Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I'm Nuraisha Malia, and in this video, I want to present my listening log book, which is this book was filled by my listening comprehension activities in 6 days. And we begin from the first day. For the first day at Monday, November 8, 2021, I listened to an audio for my listening comprehension activity, and the title of this audio is U.S. Park Honors Women's Right. And the topic of this audio is about the history of women's right, National Historical Park. And in this audio, we can learn about the history of women's right movement in America. This movement began when women and men gathered at the town's Wesleyan Chapel for the Women's Rights Convention. They gathered to discuss about social, civil, and religious condition and the rights of women. And in today's convention, the leader of this movement, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, with 68 women and 32 men, signed the Declaration of Sentiments. In 1920, or 70 years later, the 19th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution gave women the right to vote. The meeting in Seneca Falls paved the way for the women's rights movement in America. And the Women's Rights National Historical Park honors its role in U.S. history. And Seneca Falls is now also home to the National Women's Hall of Fame that it was created in 1969. And the National Women's Hall of Fame is the oldest organization that recognizes and honors of the importance of American women. In the second day, I listened to an audio entitled Washington's Cherry Blossoms, the Signal of Spring. The topic of this audio is about the history of cherry blossoms in Washington, D.C. In this audio, the speaker tells us about the history of cherry blossom trees, which is the most famous attraction in the West Potomac Park, Washington, D.C. These flowers is a symbol of international friendship, which are given as a gift from Japan. On March 26, 1912, more than 3,000 cherry trees arrived in Washington. Most of the trees were planted around the tidal basin to prevent Potomac River from flooding. But cherry trees were also planted near the Washington Monument and the White House. The cherry blossom attraction was begun in spring, and more than 1.5 million people around the world visit nation's capital during 2 weeks cherry blossom festival to see the cherry trees at their peak bloom. In the third day, I listened to an audio entitled Hawaii Volcanoes National Park, A Fiery World. The topic of this audio is about the history of the mountain of Mauna Loa. In this audio, the speakers tell about the legend of the tallest volcano mountain in Hawaii. It is called Mauna Loa. Moreover, the speakers also guide us to explore Hawaii Volcanoes National Park. The speakers also talk about the unusual features at Hawaii National Park, such as the 7 ecological areas in the park, native plants and animals, native culture, and many interesting sites within the park. In the fourth day, I listened to an audio entitled Pfizer Says Its COVID Pill 90% Effective. The topic of this audio is about the evidence of the risks and the effectiveness of Pfizer pill. The speaker in this audio tells us about the high risk of Pfizer pill for COVID-19. Even though Pfizer has a high risk for adults, the study shows that no one died after receiving Pfizer. A larger study of 1290 people also shows an 85% reduction among those treated within 5 days. In that study, 6 people who received the Pfizer medication were hospitalized, and no one in that group was died. The Pfizer's chief scientific officer, Dr. Michael Dalston, told the Associated Press that Pfizer is a great drug with almost 90% efficacy and 100% protection for death. The FDA has already approved several treatments for COVID-19, but all of them must be injected by healthcare workers. And these pills can be taken at home and are easier to send around the world. And in the fifth day, I listened to an audio entitled Students Learning English Had a Difficult Time During the Pandemic. And the topic of this audio is talking about a study which is conducted to find out the cause of ESL difficulties in learning English during the pandemic. And in this audio, we can listen that the speaker tells about the ESL difficulties to learn English during the coronavirus health crisis based on a group research at the University of Wisconsin. The researchers found scores in many areas of English proficiency such as reading, speaking, listening, and writing were decreased during the last school year, and the biggest decreases were in speaking. Students in the elementary and middle school grades showed the biggest decreases, while in high school improved in areas like listening and reading. Educators and school officials say that online classes made it more difficult for ESL students to use English when it was not spoken at home. This study became pros and cons because there are some limits to the WADA data of this research, like the students were tested at irregular times, and the low of the total number of the students in the study. Besides, villages said that this study provides useful information, but the educators should still be careful because the study definitely not representative of all English learners in the country. Sixth day, I listened to an audio entitled Do Electric Cars Help the Environment? And the topic of this audio is talking about the effectiveness of electric cars to reduce carbon gases emission. And in this audio, the speaker tells about a study that conducted to answer the question. And the Radiant Energy Group compared gas emissions caused by a gasoline vehicle and from charging an electric vehicle. In some nations, electric vehicles lead to the release of more carbon gases than gasoline cars. The study showed how the auto industry's ability to reduce emissions depends on what national power system used to produce electricity. European countries have not solved how to reduce carbon emissions and how to store some kinds of renewable energy in their systems. In Europe, car makers have been required to meet EU carbon reduction standards. EEA information says that they have made their gasoline engines more fuel efficient. As a result, the carbon emissions of new gasoline-powered cars in Europe fell an average of 25% between 2006 and 2016. That's all my listening comprehension activities in 6 days, and hopefully that I can improve my listening skill and also my speaking skill so that I can present my material or logbook or any other presentation will be better than these days. And I hope that you are willing to make your own listening logbook so that you can practice your listening in every single day, and write down your practice in your listening logbook so that we can learn to each other and we can improve our listening comprehension skill together. And I apologize for any mistakes that I have made in this presentation. And lastly, thank you for your attention. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.